Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 220. And before we get started, a quick reminder to follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and now on Spotify. So, without further ado, the topic today is proof, not promises, attesting what your agent is. And our guest today is Imran Siddique, Chief Platform Officer at OPAQUE Systems. Welcome, Imran.
Thanks so much. Super happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the next 45 minutes.
So before we dive into the topic at hand, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background.
All right. Been working on AI for almost like, I don't even know since when, but AI is new, all new. A little bit about background of myself. Started my career in Microsoft, and that was the only company I worked for. I spent most of my career on the platform, building platform services on Azure, and that is where I learned about how to build large scale systems. And interestingly, I launched a book today. It's called Architecting at Scale, which is all about my experiences. That's like phase one. Phase two, I started like really going deeper into the agent governance space and trying to see like, hey, what this governance is all about. Build agent governance toolkit, launched, and then the question was like, hey, do we stop here? Like, do we continue moving? And then the phase three started. That's where the proof comes. And like, governance is great, but like, what is the proof? And that is where I have been like focusing on for last 3 months, joining Opaque Systems as a chief platform officer. That's all about like very all the three phases of my career.
So we're going to put a link to the book in the episode notes. Um, every episode, being a geek, I like GitHub. And so I use GitHub wikis for notes. So every episode has notes. So this one is glue.co/IOH-220. I'll put a link to the book in it, and I'll put a link to it in the post. And it's called Architecting at Scale. And it's a packed book. So I'll definitely be ordering this one. I don't know how you get the time, Imran, because I see how many commits you also have on your various projects. So I'm definitely impressed with the productivity. Um, but
Yeah. Thank you. So this book we have been working on for almost like an year now, and this is a very interesting book. So we're trying something new. So in addition to the book, we also have a GitHub repository which says that hey, as you go along reading the chapters of the book, it says that hey, why don't we get our hands dirty? So we are like taking an example where it's like a small app someone is building on their own, and at the end of the book we are like really scaling it to the enterprises, and like for each of these spaces is like hey, you get your hands dirty, and then you want the sample to start with, it's in the GitHub repository. So it's like a very new way of thinking about the book. So it has been fun working on it.
yeah, Microsoft has scale problems that I think most companies don't, but it's like it gives you a chance to really test your theories in a way that you can't do unless you have access to that. So yeah, I'm definitely going to order the book myself, and we'll see. Maybe we'll do a follow up on the book itself because we could do an episode.
That
I'm
would
sure
be
there's
awesome.
enough to talk about just there. But let's pivot to the topic today because I think of you as an expert in agentic governance. We met actually a while back when you were working at Microsoft on the Agent Governance Toolkit, or what we now call, or well, AGT or AGT. Um, and so the first question I want to start out with, because Agent Governance Toolkit, it has governance in the title of it, but I find that governance can be a marketing term today that can mean practically whatever the company wants it to mean. And I'm curious, how you've come to think about this word, and if you have what does govern mean to you, and who are the governors who are doing the governing?
I think that's a very good question. So for me, what governance really means is and let's just focus on the agentic systems because that is what I have been focusing
Mhm.
on. So from an agentic systems perspective, what governance means is like uh, is it really behaving the way you want it to be, to start with in simple terms, like forget, forget about all the internal complicated details about like hey, is the authorizations in place, is the access control in place, is the policies are in place, and like all of those things are like implementation details. But I think the whole idea is like you want the system to behave in one way or another, and is it like, do you think this is going in the right direction? And the definition keeps on changing. Like, I think if I just go back to like when I started the initial work on the governance toolkit, uh, I was answering a simple question. Like, I was getting my hands dirty with all the agents, and I was just trying to see that, hey, can I really control the actions because I'm just saying yes to all and like all of those things? So is there any way I can actually? So that was like a simple problem, and that was a governance for me. But as I like fast forward like 9 months or maybe almost a year, you see the models are super intelligent and they're getting intelligent every day. So governing an agent or model maybe 9 months back was way different. Like, hey, just maybe control their actions. But now and then in the near future, the agents and the models, I use this like terms like together, are going to be intelligent enough to not even tell you what they're doing. They're not going to even tell you all the reasoning and stuff. So governance definition would be very different from what the governance definition is. But for me, it's like, hey, do you understand what's happening? Observability. Can you see what's going on? Can you control all of these things? And can you take actions when needed? And these actions can be beyond what like you have configured the system with. So there's like kind of like connections of all of those things together.
Sometimes there's a fine line. I find people conflate governance and authorization. Where is the line between what is authorization and what is governance?
Yeah. Um, Authorization, I would say, is like the easy problem to solve today, because you. So let's start with authorization. I really want to make sure uh, I have uh, I have an actor and I have an actor working on some taking some actions, and then I really want to figure out what the actions are. Uh, the actions may be on something, and I really want to make sure I have system in place which says that, hey, what is allowed, what is not allowed. Hey, you want to access this file. Are you authorized to access this file or not? And then I'm going to take control over it. I'm going to make a decision. That's all. That's all good. Governance is beyond that. I'm authorizing you to do a $1 transaction, but you are doing 50 transactions in 1 minute of $1 each. You have authorization, but like I want to govern that you're not doing something wrong.
Hmm.
So it goes like authorization becomes part of it, which like governance actually says this observability and everything together.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to work on this more as an industry, because I would say that maybe so using your example, I'm authorized to do a $1 transaction, but am I authorized to do 50,000 1 hour $1 transactions in 1 minute? No. Um, and you'd say, well, there should be a governance constraint that says, there's a maximum number of transactions per. But to me, that just sounds like a policy. I should have a policy that says there's a maximum number of these transactions. And Dogwood actually introduces the idea of some temporal count, that it's not just a single point in time, but there are aggregates over time that might be like 3 bad logins and you're locked out, you know, those types of temporal policies. Um, well, okay, so let's pivot from governance and go into, because you've been working on this immense like piece of software called Agent Trust, and Agent Trust is a number of related repositories, and you're trying to coalesce a community around this new project. So I just want to introduce the project sort of in pieces, because it's a number of different pieces. And the first part I wanted to ask about, and maybe it's because I'm obsessed with this topic, um, but Agent Trust describes a process where you use hardware attestation um, in order to provide a record of the agent identity. And maybe we could start there, because I feel like that's really fundamental to the technology. So, what's actually what's in that agent manifest?
Yeah, awesome. So maybe a little bit of background before we actually talk about Agent Trust and one of the projects of Agent Trust. So when I released Agent Governance Toolkit as part of Microsoft, and then we got a lot of people contributing to it. It's a good community which we built as part of it. Fast forward, it's going well. We are like almost everywhere. We are being quoted in the different projects and integrations. One thing which I started thinking about was we were relying on policies, for example, and policies are good. But I think as I was looking at like hey, what's the latest happening in the model space, and then they're becoming much more powerful than they are, and they would be. So, is there a way where models can just go ahead and change the policy itself, or can they can just do whatever you want them to do? For example, today I just tell my Claude instance, it says, hey, you know what, I cannot do this for you, and it's like, hey, please try again, and then it does it, like literally just one like please, and then it happens like really, and there is nothing between them and us. So I think the question was more about, is there a way where we should be protecting some of our important key artifacts uh, through some other means? And that is where my interest on the confidential AI started becoming more and more. And then I was reached out by OPAQUE Systems, and I was like, these guys were like doing something cool on the confidential AI. I was like, what is this? And then really went deeper, and it's like, hey, they were building on top of the confidential VMs, working very closely with NVIDIA, Intel, AMD, Microsoft, Google, building this entire stack of saying that, hey, if you deploy something in these systems, we are going to protect you. It's like an enclave which we form, and then we do attestations. Uh, and that looked cool to me. So the question which I had was, can I bring this governance and confidential AI together? And that is where the Agent Manifest was the first project which we worked on.
Yeah, I just want to hit pause there for a second because you mentioned confidential computing, um, which I think, when I think of this, I'm thinking about hardware that's virtualized that wants to emulate the hardware encryption module. So if we have a piece of hardware, we can say, well, we have this hardware encryption module, there's TPM or the secure enclave, and that basically prevents me from ever exporting the private key. So we can rely on it more because there's no way to trust the user to share his private key. It's physically impossible in the design. And then, but then you have this idea of virtual confidential computing where there's no hardware. So you have some type of software hardware encryption module or secure enclave, and that enables you to do certain things that would require you to either share the hardware TPM, but it gives you a unique identity that comes along with being able to use a private key for signing. But maybe you could just talk a little bit about how does this actually relate to AI? Because I haven't really heard the term confidential AI, and what's the intersection of these two areas?
Yes, that's a good topic. So confidential, everything you said, we don't have to repeat. And how does it relate to AI? Is uh, the stack which we have been building on the opaque system. So it's a commercial stack, and I think that's like super powerful. And I was like, okay, how do we actually bring some of the importance and goodness to the open stack? So what it does is it says that, hey, what do we want to protect? Like in case of AI, we want to, I think the to start with, we want to protect the model, let's say the data movements. If the model has access to some data, I want, and then if this data is super confidential, I don't want this data to be leaked out outside. I enable this data, decrypt this data only inside the enclave, and say, hey, you can work on this data, but the moment this data goes outside, it's encrypted. So that's how the some of the basics implementations of and use cases of confidential AI came into it. But I think fast forward, we'll just talk about today. And you talk about agent manifest, and let's take that example and then say how this confidential AI and like all of this thing comes together. One simple question which I was trying to answer is, hey, you deploy an agent in production on day one. On day 30, do you know is the same agent which is actually in production? How do you prove it? How do you do the verifiability? And what if the policies change? What if the model changed? What if like something changed? Like you don't even know. So it's like agent manifest says that, hey, this is a manifest of like an agent, which obviously has a bunch of artifacts, and then you use your hardware enclave and attestation if you want to. Obviously, we have different ways, and you can go and create this hash and then go sign it. and then pass this information to all the governance which you have in place. If you have seed a policy evaluator or like something else, you can actually pass this information. So you can actually say that, hey, on day one, this was your hash. What is your hash today? And then I can do a
When you
different.
say hash, I'm sorry, are you saying is it an actual hash, or are you saying it's an attestation, like some type of token that's been signed with the private key for of the agent? I just want to make sure that you actually mean hash there.
No, it's actually the token signed by the attestation service, and like that's what. But I was like to simplify it, I was just using the term hash. But I
Yeah.
also use the term hash because what we heard from people when we came up with this agent manifest, people are
Hmm.
like, that looks all cool, but who is going to have a confidential environment to have agents? There are like millions of agents being deployed today. Are you guys saying that, hey, all of these agents should be deployed with confidential VMs? So we were like, hey, you know what? Maybe let's dive deeper into this overall architecture and design, and
Hmm.
then come up with the different levels of guarantees. So if you want a software level guarantee, maybe we're not going to have any attestation and all, and maybe that is where hashes and all can come in. Maybe we have TPMs, we have TEs. So then
Hmm.
we actually just drill down into those things. And so when you talk about TEs, then we have verifiers and attestation and all. But if you're like, you want to use the same concepts but you don't really have the real hardwares and stuff, then you
Hmm.
we use like hashes and stuff. So that's what it is.
I see. Um, I like the idea of an attestation where the agent says, here's what I am. I don't have the list in front of me, but here's the model that I have. Here's the policy store version that I'm using. Um, here's, I guess, some other metadata about my agent. Um, and here's a way, I guess, that I can prove my identity because I can prove possession of this private key. Um, so it's using a token. Is the agent attestation, is that using the EAT token? This is a new RFC, RFC 9711, the entity attestation token, or EAT token. Um, I'm wondering if this attestation that you're talking about, what's the format of this
Yeah,
token?
we
Is that
align with
the EAT
the
token?
we aligned with the it. So one of the things which we wanted to do was we didn't want to reinvent anything, like saying that, hey, reinventing the wheel, coming up with new standard and trying to actually go propose it, that's just going to waste a lot of time. Like really give something which works today. So we said, hey, all of these things should be eat, and then we also follow this rats model, like the verify attester and relying party and stuff. And we said, hey, we use existing standards wherever possible, as much as possible, and let's actually get these things in place. Agent manifest should be like the starting point. That should be not, I'm deploying an agent in production, I really want to go attest it, like what am I deploying it, and if something is changing, drifting, I should know about it, I can go reattest it. But the policy, for example, the agent on its own should not be changing its policy in production 2 days later, I am not aware of it, and then the policy which I think is working in the production is not the policy which agent has modified it. All of those things will be adrift and I will be able to catch it. And that is like exact the problem we wanted to solve, and we were like, okay, we'll just use the eats, we'll generate all of these things in the format which align with the eats and stuff. Yeah.
Now, if there was Trivial Pursuit for tokens, I think I do pretty well on this. But I never heard of the E token. And I'm just curious, maybe I'm mostly familiar with FIDO attestations and assertions and OAuth attestations and assertions, but we're seeing really an explosion of new types of token formats and strategies, or even like blockchain techniques being used to create new types of artifacts. So I guess I have never seen the EAT token in the wild. This is the first time I'm seeing it being used. Maybe had you seen it, have you seen it in use in other applications? And it's an RFC already, so I'm just wondering, like, if you'd seen other use cases where it was already in use, or is this the first use case you've also seen?
From my experience coming from the Asian governance space and like
Hmm.
really going deeper into the confidential AI space, the first time I heard about EAT and RATs was when I came across a Trace project. Trace is one of the projects under agentrust-io, which is which was actually the first one before Agent Manifest. And the
Yeah.
idea was simple. The idea was like, hey, whatever is happening in the system, I want to really have all of these things in a standard format, attested via hardware in which you're running. And this is where the project was saying that, hey, we are not reinventing the wheel. We want all of these things in the eats format. We want to use the rats in order to figure explicitly say who is the relying party, who is a tester, who is a verifier, and all of those things. So that is where I came across this one for the first time. And uh,
So EAT came out of the rats. I'm guessing it came out of the rats working group, which is a new working group at
somewhere
I.
like I think in that, but I don't really have all the historical
Yeah.
and like all of
I
those.
wanted to find rats because this is a very generous acronym. So RATS is the Remote Attestation Procedures Architecture. Um, and there is a new working group called a new RATS working group out there, the Remote Attestation Procedures Working Group. And so I don't know, that might be interesting for our geeky guests at IOH who like to know because we tend to focus in the identity community on OAuth and FIDO Alliance stuff. Um, but there's a new protocol, there's a new working group that called NMOP, the
I
Network
see.
Managed Operations,
I
I think.
see.
And you mentioned like one of the important things is to have a policy store version and to standardize, so I can say it's this policy um, but it's this version of the policy because the policy itself could have changed.
Could
That
have
was
changed.
active at runtime, and we're having a conversation about this here at Glue. We are proposing a new standard for policy stores at the Authzen working group at OpenID Foundation, and it also talks about a standard artifact for policy stores and a standard way to version it. Anyway, but it's just interesting to hear non-identity centric people. I think are bringing us good information into the identity information about other stuff that's happening at OAuth that intersects with our work these days.
I'll just quickly grab my tea. Just one second. Right, I'm back. Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned trace,
Yeah.
um, and we don't do a lot of screen sharing here, but I'm going to do a rare screen sharing,
Okay.
and
Awesome.
I just want to show what the trust record looks like.
Mhm.
Um, and so for those people listening, I will read through some of the questions. So a trace record, I guess, is a standard way to represent something that happened, and it answers what model ran, where did it run, under which policy, what data did it touch, which tools were called, and is the record independently anchored. Um, that's a lot of good information about if you're trying to reconstruct what happened in your AI, like how your AI went wrong. Um, that's a lot of good information that you might want to have. Let me stop sharing. Um, and so maybe you could talk a little bit about trace, about the idea of this record. And one thing I'm particularly interested in is how often do records get written? Because potentially there could be a lot of policy decisions, and that's a lot of information. And it seems like it's great to have all that information, but it also seems like it could be a fire hose of data that could really explode the whole transaction size of your application. So maybe you could talk a little bit about trace.
Maybe let's talk about trace. So, like, I think the screenshot was awesome, and this is obviously there's a lot more information you can add, a lot less information you can add, but the idea is simple. You really want to have all of this information. If an action was taken by an agent at any point of time, 6 months later, if there is a compliance report and or auditing that has to be happened, trace can help you with that information, saying that hey, when this action was taken, this was the state, this was the model which was running, this was the hardware attestations, this were the policies which were being used, and this was a timestamp, and all of those things happened. The idea with the trace was We would do it per session. Like, hey, your agent starts, and maybe like a lot of things happens, and you take a snapshot saying that, hey, tell me all the things that happen, and one record. And
Mm.
then this record is tamper evident, like because of this, like I think the way implementations happens. And then you can just say this record will never get tampered, and then agent itself will not be able to regenerate this report or change it because you can easily catch it. But then there were a lot of use cases. One of the use cases was like, we want to generate for each agent's action, can I have a trace record? That's too much of records. But then there is a fine boundary which we have to create, like what is really a record from a trace perspective which auditor can use or can be used for the compliance, or what is telemetry. And I think you really have to differentiate the two. So telemetry can be like all of those things happening in the system, like you have hundreds of observability stuff which is coming in, and we don't really want trace to be replacing any of the telemetry, and telemetry to say that trace is one of the telemetry. I think we really wanted to have a clear differentiation saying that, hey, we just care about like if anything happened in the system, AI took any action, we really want a record of it, and like what was happening, like I think the table which you showed, and then maybe more, and that is where traces. Everything else is telemetry, observability, and then that's completely different ball game. We have started like doing some work on the agentrust-io, trying to educate people on like where telemetry stops, observability comes, and where it is traces.
Um, so there's a whole bunch of directions we can go here because why don't we take a step back for a second? So we talked about some of the specifics like trace and the agent manifest um, or the attestation that the agent is making about its identity. How does this all fit together? And there's agentrust-io. Maybe you can talk like how does it all fit together as sort of a larger project?
Yeah. So if you go to agentrust-io.com, there is first thing which I try to show is called trust chain, and which I try to actually go back to, and it explains like, hey, how everything comes back together. Uh, so first of all, we have taken dependency in AGT, Agent Governance Toolkit, which we built as part of Microsoft, saying that, hey, governance, because it has a lot of good governance building blocks. We don't really want to reinvent any of it. So Agent Trust is built on top of it. Then we have Agent Manifest, which says you deployed a product agent on day one. You really want to know that what is the state of that agent today. Nothing should have changed because you really support that and nothing else. If there was a drift, you reattest. Then we have built two different projects called Confidential MCP and Confidential A2A, which is like using the governance from the Agent Governance Toolkit to some of these. So what generally agents do, agents are going to take some actions. They're going to talk to MCP. They're going to delegate some action to the other agents. And Agent Trust says that, hey, we can actually just give you the proof that, hey, right things are happening. Your agent is the indeed the agent which you wanted to run in the production. Your agent actions to MCPs are being governed, and we are generating this report as part of trace. And then we have been working on telemetry also, saying that, hey, how we can actually get rest of the uh, information together in one place. Like if there are hundreds of agents running and then they are generating different kind of outputs, and maybe governance are generating their own outputs and the other systems, how we can get all of these things together in one place. That's all like the high level this entire agent trust IO and trust changes.
And this has been organized at the Linux Foundation as an open source project. Um, is that right?
So, since these are, it was very intentionally a lot of small repositories in this project in order to graduate them at different point of time. So, Trace graduated. We work very closely with Intel, AMD, Microsoft, TII, and then we made it part of Linux Foundation. So this is part of Linux Foundation. We are working on Agent Manifest. Our aim is to donate it to COSI, Coalition for Secure AI. We have an RFC open. It's in phase three. Phase one was like collecting all the feedback. Phase two was like addressing all the feedback. And phase three is where we are trying to work with Agent Credentials, work stream under Coalition for Secure AI, and see that this project can be part of that. The confidential MCP and confidential A2A projects. We are in early stage once these two projects graduate because they connect the two projects together. We're in early discussions with AIF. Like for example, we also wrote a white paper on the what verifiability really means when it comes to MCP governance. So early stages, when we are ready, we might start the donation process as part of sandbox stage.
Would you say so? The MCP and the A2A product. Would you say those are a type of proxy? Because we see a lot of them. I say throw a rock, you hit 10 proxies. Would you say is that the approach for this MCP repository?
The confidential MCP idea was we don't want to reinvent anything. Like I said, if problems are being solved, we are like community together, one community of open source. So we want to just build on top of each other. So there is already an MCP protocol. We love it. There is already Cedar to use for the governance. We love it. Agent governance toolkit from Microsoft has something on the MCP governance. We love it. There is a attestation which comes from different hardware partners. We love it. NVIDIA, Intel, we work very closely with them. Confidential MCP says, can I leverage agent manifest to ensure that the governance happens only when I have really verified I'm working with the right agent? Can I leverage CEDA policies to enable the governance for MCP servers? Can I use the enclave, which can be on top of like GCP or Azure, to enable this protection of these policies for you? And at the end of the day, can I generate this record in a trace format, which you can use it later? So you can think of it like yes. To answer your question, yes, it's like a gateway between your agent and MCP, but then it tries to bring all of these things together and gives you that. So I think that is how it is.
A governance aware gateway.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think last Thursday I had Christian Posta on from solo.io, and they've contributed Agent Gateway to the AI
Agentic AI
the
Foundation.
Agentic AI Foundation.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, and one thing that I notice is that, and we might actually patch this, but it doesn't really have any governance features in it. Its main goal, I think, was to make things really easy, but it doesn't seem. It seemed like it was lacking in the ability to govern it. Um, so I think there is a need, in a way, for a governance-aware proxy. Um, but there are a lot of proxies, so I think it's hard. It's hard, it's such a competitive, hard area to get adoption, and there's so many other issues that I think need to be implemented that aren't really necessarily security features. So you might have the proxy, but not the some of the other features that you need. And Solo.io has a ton of experience building their API gateway and their service mesh. Um, so interesting. I'm wondering, you've mentioned Cedar a couple of times, and of course, we have a real interest here in Cedar at Glue. We built a product called the Cedarling, and through the Janssen project. But I'm curious, how are you using Cedar in this, and why did you select Cedar as a preferred policy engine?
That's a good question. So when I think it all goes back to Asian governance toolkit. When we were building that, and I think we kind of like supported everything. Like, hey, YAML, like you can just author your policies in YAML, and we'll support it. And then we actually had interest from the community saying that OPA. I think that was big at some point of time, and then the contributions started flowing in on the Cedar. But I think uh, when we thought of like confidential MCP and saying that hey, we need governance for MCP calls, and then like I said, we want to build on like stuff which already exists. We had to make a call saying that hey, just scope it. Like let's just don't go and like say hey, we support Cedar, and like this. What is like the one which everyone is kind of like aligning to, which everyone understands, and then when you say it, it really makes sense. And Cedar was like the top answer, saying that hey, people are aligning on it, and most of the
Interesting.
governance, and that was the real reason. And it was like okay maybe, and then all the discussions we had with customers on our side, on opaque sides, And like community on the agent trust IO side, no one has asked any questions saying that, hey, we could have used something else that isn't serious. So I think the decision was right. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and we talk about something at Glue called declarative security, um, where you can't. There's an infinite number of things that could go wrong, so you can't know that you've made policies about all
Yeah.
the like weird all the things that the agent shouldn't do, which is unlimited. Um, And so it's better to start out from a position of here's what is allowed, everything is denied, here's what's allowed. And I know that if you're only doing this, I can prove that you can't do this other thing because we didn't specifically allow it. And I feel like there is a good overlap with Agent Trust.io with that type of position of declarative security.
Declarative. So I think we are 100% aligned on that. Allow is the one which we say, hey, what we don't know is not allowed by default. And then from what we know, we are allowing only on these things, and that is how the everything is based on. But you can always go improvise. So even all the demos and examples in the Agent Trust.io project, all the repositories actually starts with allow part, saying that hey, these are the things which is allowed, and we focus on that. If you really have scenarios which you would allow, bring in. But everything else we don't know, it's not allowed.
Yeah. One of the topics of discussion is around what's the identifier of the agent. And this sounds easy, but it's become actually a difficult challenge. In OAuth, we have an idea of a client ID, which is normally issued by the authorization server to the client, and it's normally a non-guessable like string. Um, it's basically a username for an API, but it's a long and non-guessable one. Um, but it turns out that client ID doesn't seem to be a good match for agent identity. Um, and so I think in Agent Trust, it mentions that you use Spiffy to bootstrap what's the identifier for the agent. But I just want to throw in another wrinkle, which is that sometimes agents can spawn subagents. And so I wonder what are the identifiers for those subagents, or do they not matter? So I'm curious, where do you shake out on um, what at what point do you say that an agent needs an identifier, a unique identifier, and how do you handle those subagent identifiers, or do you just not distinguish between subagents?
That's a very good question, personally, and I think it just goes back to like at different points of time, all the different projects which we have been involved in, including today and including the future. Um, so, identity is a topic which actually comes into discussion. Even agent manifest, when we were talking about it, people are like, "Hey, is this an identity?" I was like, "No, it's not an agent identity. It's just a manifest about what agent is." We use PIFE because we started decentralized DIDs, identities, and then there was a huge like Cedar. I think people are like kind of like closing on the spiffy, and then we were like, okay, we use that. The question was, uh, there are two kinds of agents. Maybe I'm just simplifying it. Temporary, and then the ones which are more like permanent ones. You deploy an agent, you configure it, and then that's doing a job. That definitely needs an identity. Now it creates an agent on its own, sub agent, and delegates some work, does the work, deletes it. Like, do you really want to? Obviously, there is going to be a delegation profile. That profile is going to have some information. There's going to be some scope, and then beyond identity, there is a lot of things which is going to be associated with this sub agent which gets created. Now, this sub agent is just going to inherit the identity from the parent agent, or is it going to have its own identity? If it is going to have its own identity, how many IDs we are talking about? Like, because you are going to end up creating a lot more, and they would also end up creating a lot more. So we're not solving any of those problems right now. The only problem which we were interested to solve was in the confidential A2A space, saying that hey, what that profile would look like, and can we attest that profile for the sub agents when this agent to agent delegation is happening, so that we know that if the agent A has scope this much, the B which is getting delegated cannot have a scope bigger than the parent scope, and so the entire chain. and can we verify this chain stuff. So I think our research has been focusing a lot more on the delegations, profiles, and chains verification scope. uh, Not too much on the identity. We have been like just saying that, hey, if it's working, we'll just use that.
We talked a little bit about Agent Gateway because that's how kind of how you got spun into this at Microsoft. Um, can you talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of AGT from the time you started it to today? Have they sort of sharpened their focus or evolved, or and what's your take on the current direction of AGT?
Yeah. So it started as even before it was AGT, it was like a lot of small projects coming together. And then we, as Microsoft, we open source under one umbrella, saying that, hey, when you start thinking about agent governance, you should be thinking about all of these things. Definitely identity, definitely policies, definitely mesh. Mesh was like a big thing at that point of time. And then observability. So we got like four stacks together and we created layer cake, launched it, and then we started talking to people, and then it really clicked with everyone, saying that, hey, this makes sense, this makes sense. But fast forward, all the basic concepts which we had in AGT, I think they evolved and graduated. Like initially we just used DIDs, but then identity space evolved. We had a lot of building blocks on the Asian mesh, but Asian mesh is becoming a very, very deep research projects in most of the frontier labs, and it is taking a very different shape than what it was today. Policy is becoming big, and then agent governance toolkit, while it had observability and everything, it started being known for policies. It started being known for governance, and obviously we launched a V2 project called agent control specification as part of build, and then we made it part of it. So the focus of AGT is like, hey, if things have evolved, we let down the foundation, we told people, hey, this is the problem space we should be focusing on, but we are graduating in much better shape. Let's use ACS and contribute, donate it to AIF. So we are actually focusing on that part. So ACS is like the focus right now, and then we are like working very closely with AIF and trying to see that if we can, that can be donated to a standard body, so that everyone is like aligned on at least something, and everything else we are like replacing it, saying that, hey, if we came up with DIDs and spiffy, but if everyone is closing on spiffy, maybe like we remove that DID and then we just go on the spiffy. So I think that's how project has been evolving. My contribution to AGT is going a little down because my focus has been a lot more on the agentrust-io, but I have been involved with them.
Yeah, I've noticed from all the commits on Agent Trust GitHub repository. So the pigeons are flying, so they're telling us it's time's up. But before we go, maybe any last thoughts?
Yeah, so on September 9th, we are hosting a very interesting webinar. Me focusing on the Agent Trust IO, Dick Hart focusing on the AOT, and Joshua focusing on the Agent Trust framework. We are all coming together and trying to see that, hey, when these all frameworks come together, Agent Trust IO, AOT, and ATF, how we can really solve that trust problem. And I think that's going to be like our preview on September 9th. So I look forward to meeting all of you on that. And then we have an in-person in October where we really do a good demo and show that a real example and like how everything fits together. And we give you a good answer to the trust, which everyone actually is waiting for. That's what I would say.
So great. And if send me on LinkedIn a link to the webinar, I'll add that
Yes.
also to the episode notes. Which I'll just remind everyone, glue.co/IOH-220. Make a quick announcement about the next episode. Jimmy Mesta, the security problem starts when AI agents act. Sounds like it's Imran, 3 out of 4 of our episodes these days are about agentic governance and security. So the trend continues. Um, and one last quick reminder, follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn. We're trying to get to 3,000, YouTube, and now on Spotify. And we're even posting video now to Spotify. So we're all in on Spotify now. So with that, I'll say, Imran, thank you so much. I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I'm glad I have more questions, but we might have to schedule a follow-up in the future. But thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Would love to come again. Awesome.
Okay, and thanks, audience, and we'll see you next time.